So there comes a time in every car's life, not to exclude this Honda, where certain things happen, certain things don't go right, and things just don't quite run as smoothly as they used to. This is a 2008 Honda Accord. It's got about 180,000 miles on it, complete with this vehicle as it was driving down the road. Just sort of stalled out, wouldn't restart. Got towed in, and I got to be honest with you, I already know what's wrong with it. But this car gives us a great opportunity to sort of practice some good fundamental testing techniques for vehicles that are prone to problems like this Honda has. So, just to start off, let's try and start this thing up, just kind of see what it does. I'm just going to hop in this thing and I'm just going to crank it over. And I want you to listen to how it sounds as it cranks. So when I have a vehicle like this, the first place that I really like to start is just with the scan tool. Any fault codes that we have in memory, that's really going to kind of point us in the right direction as far as where we're going. I think a lot of you already have a suspicion as to what's going on with this thing, and you'd be right. This timing chain has slipped on this bad boy, and it's out of time. That's why this thing stalled out. That's why it no longer runs. So let's go to the scan tool. Let's take a look at trouble codes, and then we're going to cover some ways to identify a vehicle with a timing problem. Got our vehicle all identified here. When you're talking about a no start, really the best place to start is the scan tool, in my opinion. Especially on these newer cars where there's so many complex systems involved. I mean, the scan tool can really kind of give you a head start on where you're going. And in the case of this vehicle, it absolutely did. Here in a minute, you'll see the fault code that I saw during my initial checkout of this, and that really, along with the sounds of how this thing cranks over and stuff like that, that really sort of put me off in this direction pretty much right off the bat. So let's let this code scan do its thing. I'll let you guys take a look at the fault codes, and we'll see what you think. So these are the codes we're dealing with. Just kind of start down from the top. We've got a P1009 VTC advanced malfunction. That's a variable cam timing stuff. The real concerning one is the P0341 cam sensor A and crank sensor incorrect phase detected. Cam sensor A is in reference to the intake camshaft, just in case you were wondering. Looking at some temporary codes down here, P1129, map sensor signal higher than expected. And then we see those other two faults listed again. So, taking a look at these fault codes right off the bat, it sort of points us in the timing neighborhood. So, yeah, let's go to the car and let's start doing some tests. So here's the heart and soul of this Honda. This is a K24 engine. It is a 16-valve, 4-cylinder engine, dual overhead cam, and it has timing chains. As far as, mechanically checking the timing, you need to pull this valve cover off and do some other things. To manually check the cams, no way I'm going to do that. Sort of the way I like to do things is as easily as possible. And to me, pulling the valve covers off of this thing to have a little look and see what's going on is definitely not the easiest. So what I would like to go over is a few different methods we can use to determining if a vehicle is truly out of time. We'll also cover some engine integrity testing stuff, compression tests, leak down tests, all sorts of stuff like that. Pretty much just the same tests that I used in my initial diagnosis of this thing. So probably the easiest thing to do starting off when I have a vehicle that I am suspicious of a timing problem on is I like to just use a relative compression waveform. I just like to synchronize that with an ignition firing event using the lab scope. And oftentimes, if it's off enough, you'll see that reflected in the waveform. So that's the first test that I want to do here. To start off with this relative compression test, as far as setup goes, what I've done is I've unplugged all 4 ignition coils. And the reason I've done that is to keep the engine from trying to start, because it's going to kind of affect the way the waveform looks. As far as syncing goes, I have one channel going to the coil turn-on wire. That would be, it's like green with yellow on this number 1 ignition coil. And for my other channel that I'm actually using for the relative compression side of things, I've just got 2 test leads, and I'm just doing this directly at the battery. You know, you can use a low amp probe or something like that to do this, but I'm just opting to use voltage, mainly just because it's easier to use voltage probes for this. As far as setup, I've got 2 channels going here. Channel 1 is going to be the relative compression. That's going to be the leads hooked directly to the battery. I've just got that set on test leads, volt DC. I've got the waveform inverted, and I've got AC coupling on, and we're on a 2-volt scale. As far as channel 2, which is going to be the number 1 sync, that's going to be a 10-volt setting. Again, test lead, volt to DC. And as far as screen time, we're about 200 milliseconds. So this should give us a pretty good picture. When you're using voltage to do these relative compression tests, do not forget to invert the waveform, because instead of looking at the peaks of the ramps like we would with a current measurement, we're actually looking at the valleys, the bottom of that waveform, because that's where starter current is going to be the highest. It's going to cause the most voltage drop in the battery. So when you're using voltage for relative compression tests, just make sure to invert the waveform. But now that we've went over scope setup, let's actually take a look at what the waveform looks like. Now that you got the money shot, I'm just going to try and crank this thing over. You'll be able to see the waveform going across the screen. I won't be able to, but that's okay. I'm just going to stop this. Hopefully I didn't lose it. Oh, good. Here's our event here. I'm just going to zoom into an area of this. Should be pretty good there. Oop, scroll this back this way just a hair. Oh, it'll work nicely. Let's take this to the bench and talk about it. What I've got here on the screen is just that waveform that we took before. And what we can see here is we see 4 different TDC events on the screen. This yellow trace, of course, being our relative compression test we did at the battery. And our green trace would be our sync channel. So firing order on this, 1, 3, 4, 2. This being cylinder 1, we know this is cylinder 3. This is cylinder 4. This is cylinder 2. So starting with the relative compression waveform, what we can see here is they all appear to be pretty even, which is somewhat strange. You remember before when we first cranked this thing over, we definitely heard a cylinder that was standing out, and when I did the initial checkout of this thing, it had about 60% leakage on cylinder number 1, but we'll visit that and see what's going on there. As far as what I'm looking at here, just to kind of get a gauge of timing, is I'm looking at the peaks of this relative compression test, and I'm just going to do both of these firing events that we synced with cylinder 1. I'm just going to kind of put that cursor sort of where I believe the middle of that is. Just sort of bringing this cursor 2 over to about right there. And it looks pretty good. I think that should work. So just taking a look at this, using the cylinder number 1, turn on event as a sync for this, where the waveform drops down at the end of the square wave. That's where spark is actually occurring. And as we can see, it's happening pretty close to TDC. It might even be happening just a hair after TDC, which that'd be a little abnormal. Ideally we want to be before top dead center. Average car is probably around 10 degrees or so during cranking. But sort of based off of this, we're pretty close. So as far as this test goes, I don't think it offers a whole lot of info here. I think the next test we should do is cam crank correlation using a known good waveform. So that's what we're going to do next. So this is the setup we're using for this test. As you can see, I've already got our waveform captured. So this red lead here, it's going way back there. That's going to be our crank sensor. I've got that going to channel 1. The screen lead here, I've got that going to channel 2, and that's going to be the intake cam. This other red lead is going to the exhaust cam sensor B, and that's going to be channel number 3. So let's get this thing to the bench and compare it to a known good. This is the waveform we grabbed off the car. Let's just take a look at it and kind of get our bearings about where everything is. This blue trace that we're seeing here, that's our exhaust cam. The green trace represents our intake cam. So let's take a look at how we line up here in comparison to our cranksink. So if we take a look at this blue trace here, that's our exhaust cam. We have 6 pulses, 6 downward pulses of the crank sensor before we actually get to the sink notch. We can see that repeats itself over here. Take a look at the intake, which is our green trace. I already drugged this up and measured, but we have 5 pulses to the beginning of the sink notch from the end of the notch on the intake camshaft, which is the green trace. So 6 pulses from the beginning of the blue trace to the start of the sink notch on the crank, and 5 pulses from the end of the sink notch on this intake cam to the beginning sink notch on the crank. Let's take a look at the known good and see how that compares. So this is a known good that I grabbed from IATN. We can already see that there's a difference in this one. Taking a look at our blue trace here, obviously you can't see it because our color printing's not working right, but this waveform here, these 2 larger square waves, it's going to be the exhaust cam. And as we can see, the start of this exhaust cam is 2 downward pulses after the end of the cranksink. In comparison, ours that we took, just to sort of show that again, we're 5 pulses before the start. So just take a look at this real quick. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 downward pulses. Then we have the crank sink here. Moving back to this one, we can see ours starts after the end of the sink, the crank sink. 2 notches after. Same thing for the intake, which is this one here. 3 pulses after the end of the crank sink is where the start of our high intake pulse is. If we take a look at the one we pulled off the car, we sort of shoot this up, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pulses before the beginning of the crank sink on ours. So really just with that test, we can already tell that our timing's off. So now the question is, did we hurt anything? So to see if we hurt anything on this engine, what I want to do is I want to do a leak down test, and the way I'm going to do that is I'm just going to remove all of these ignition coils, remove all of these plugs, and I'm going to install a leak down tester into the vehicle. What that's going to allow us to do is to see if any of these valves got whacked up by the piston when this chain slipped. So we're going to pull all these plugs out. I'm going to pull this right front wheel off. That's going to allow us to turn the crankshaft and get these cylinders to top dead center, and we're going to see how things look. So I'm just going to start by getting this T-pin out from where we were doing some testing before. I've already got all the coils disconnected. 4 10mm bolts, that's what holds these coils in. Just using a little cordless impact to get those out. I'm going to set these coils up here on the cowl. There we go. Set these bolts up here so I don't lose them. I'm going to get these plugs broke loose, just a standard 5/8 plug socket. All right, good to go there. I'm going to get these out the rest of the way using this. Just to sort of spin them out. That's all I'm using this for. All right. Going with a magnet, since my spark plug socket doesn't really hold these plugs in all too well anymore. Did that one already come out? Nope. There it is. And there's that one. And there's our last one. All right, I'm just going to get this right front corner picked up so I can get this wheel off. That should work. Don't need to go up much, just enough to get the wheel off. Come in here, already got my gun ready. There we go. Get Get this tire off. Now we have good access to the crankshaft. So to find out where TDC is, all I've done is I've just stuck this screwdriver in the number 1 hole. I've got my ratchet going down here to the crankshaft. It's a 19 mil. I'm just going to watch that screwdriver as I turn this engine over. As you can see, it's going down now, coming back up. I'm just trying to find a place that it doesn't come up anymore. It'll sort of level out. Now it's going back down. It's going to go back just a hair. I'm not sure if this is TDC compression or TDC exhaust, but we can figure that out. Not a big deal. So that looks pretty good right there. I'm calling that it. So now let's get our leak down tester installed. We have the number 1 cylinder at TDC. I have the leak down tester installed. It's already been zeroed. If we take a look at our gauges, looks like we got lucky here. Input pressure is 90 psi. Output pressure is just a little bit less than that, so just a tiny bit of leak down in that cylinder, this being cylinder number 1. So we just need to repeat this test for all of the other cylinders now. All right, so I'm gonna get this leak down tester unplugged. Our next cylinder up on the compression stroke should be cylinder number 3, so that's where we're jumping to next. Just to make this easy. Just watching that. Bring this up to the top. Trying to do this quick. So that should be TDC number 3. That's our next cylinder in the firing order. Get this screwdriver out and get our leak down tester screwed in there. There we go. Get our hose plugged back in here and we'll see how number 3 looks. So there's cylinder number 3, input pressure just above 90, output pressure just below 90. So we got lucky on that one too. Let's move on to the next cylinder. Remember our firing order is 1, 3, 4, 2. So our next cylinder coming up on the compression stroke should be cylinder number 4. Would help if I were all the way down. There we go. Just trying to get that balanced up at the top. Looks like right there is going to do it. Getting our leak down tester screwed in. There we go. Get our hose. So again, input pressure just above 90, output pressure just below that. Nothing wrong with that cylinder. Last one to check, cylinder number 2. Now I like going in firing order just so I don't have to turn the crankshaft as much. It's the only reason I'm doing it like this. Part of it's because I'm lazy. It's getting up to the top. There we go. And out of there. World's fastest leak down test right here. I'm not playing no games. Plug back in there. There's our hose. And again, a good cylinder. Input just above 90, output just below that. Not a whole lot of leakage there either. So what does this mean for us? Really what it means is we got lucky. None of these valves got smashed by the piston when this chain slipped. So sort of to wrap things up, what we can do is we can pull the cover off and we can actually take a look at the cam gears, and that'll sort of confirm our diagnosis that this chain has slipped. Not too much of a big deal on this, just a couple of 10mm bolts, so why not? All right, so I've got the cover off of this thing now, and it's gonna be a tough shot to get you. But if we look down here at the cams, sort of where my finger is, you can see we have a mark there. And if we look down at this other cam, that would be the exhaust cam. There's another mark there. They're supposed to be lined up with one another. You see I have this screwdriver in the number 1 hole. Number 1 piston is currently at TDC. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring those cam marks back in line to where what they're supposed to look like. It's probably close enough right there. Let's see if we can zoom into that. Sort of a tough shot to get underneath this line. There we go. You see those two little cutouts right there? So they're facing each other. That is how these cams are supposed to look with the number 1 piston at TDC. But let's take a look at this screwdriver. We are not at TDC. Cams are currently lined up. This screwdriver should no longer go up at this point, but watch the motion that we have. That was a full, maybe 50-degree turn on the crankshaft to get that screwdriver back up there, and we'll take another look at where our marks ended up. So you see the exhaust cam mark is down there now, and our intake cam mark is right there through that little slot. So that is confirmed. This thing is slip time, but here's what we're going to try to do. I'm here with a friend. His name is Harry. He's a real good guy, good friend of mine. He's got some experience with these K-Series Honda engines, and he thinks that maybe, just maybe, we can get this thing back in time without actually having to pull the covers off. It doesn't change our diagnosis. The timing's definitely still off. This thing needs a timing chain job. But we're going to see if we can get this thing running potentially, and I'll get back with you and let you know how that goes. So this, my friends, is Harry. This is the man with the plan. And we were able to get this thing back in time. Let me see if I can show you the timing marks. Definitely a pretty difficult shot. So we can see those 2 marks. They're facing each other now. He's just going to turn this thing over 2 rotations. We'll watch that screwdriver. And these chains are done. So he's going back down. This next stroke coming up should be TDC number 1.
Go again?
No, you feel pretty good? That's it?
See if your marks are right.
All right. He feels pretty good that that's on there. See if we can get another shot of this, of these marks. As we can see, they are now facing each other. This little arrow on this cam gear here is pointing to its little arrow on this cam cap. They're in line with each other now. So what we're going to do, since we were able to get this thing back in time, is I'm going to put the valve cover back on it, and I'm going to try and start it and see if it runs. It passed leak down, so we're not really suspicious that we have any sort of bent valve issue or anything like that. It definitely doesn't change our diagnosis. This thing needs timing chains, guides, tensioners, all that good stuff put in it to truly fix it. But since I doubt that I'll be able to film that, I want to sort of get it put back together just to see if it'll run for even just a little bit, and that'll be, that'll be the proof. So let me get it put back together and we'll see what happens. Got this thing very, very loosely put back together. Really just missing nuts. Coils aren't bolted down. This is more just for experimentation purposes. I have the lap scope back installed so we can get a cam crank if this thing does start up. Got my buddy Harry in the car. He's going to start it up. If it starts, he's not going to let it run for long. I'd say maybe 5 seconds or so. But he's going to try to start it, and we're going to see what happens. Go ahead. Wow. Let me stop this capture. All right, that's good. You can shut it off. Hey, give him a smile. So that was pretty cool. Through Harry's experience with these engines, we were able to get this thing back in time. That's not a fix though. That's more just to prove to you that our diagnosis was accurate. The fix for this thing, we definitely need to get some new chains, tensioners, guides in this thing. That's what's going to get this thing back on the road. Now that we got that, our good running capture, let's take a look at that and see how it looks compared to our old one. And we'll sort of end it with that. So this is our after we move those cams sort of roughly back in line, and it looks like when we crank this thing over, it may have actually jumped back out. These chains were pretty loose. We see at this blue trace here, our before, this thing was, I think it was like 5 teeth before the beginning of the crank sync. You can see here that we're just about in line with the start of the crank sync. Our intake cam, the start of this high pulse here, sort of right in the middle of this crank sync. So, that's way different than what we had before. But it definitely looks like we jumped. Yeah, it definitely looks like we jumped this thing during the initial crank. But, that's no big deal. We got the car running. I think this more than expresses what we set out to do here. So, this is definitely a fun one. Definitely an interesting one. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I know I did. It was super cool to be able to slip that chain back into place and get this thing running again. So that's it for another episode of Triangle Diagnostics. Catch you next time.